So how is it that agency fees continue to be forced down, but they continue to go up? I mentioned this one during the lunch break for our next presentation on the disappearance of financial transparency. Our guest is listed as Managing Director Asia Pacific, but if you check his LinkedIn profile, you'll actually read that he started the company back in the mid-90s when he was first tasked with Nestlé for figuring out how much value they were actually getting for the money that they were spending. Not in terms of ROI, but purely whether the agencies that Nestlé was working with were delivering. He then sold the company in 2004 and has now made a reappearance as the Managing Director Asia Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Brocklehurst. And don't put on your LinkedIn profile what you don't want other people to read. There you go. You got
Thank
one.
you.
Cheers.
I wanted people to read it. I don't know why it was a secret. So, as you know now, I'm David Brocklehurst, Managing Director of FirmDecisions Asia Pacific. So, the topic today is about reductions in agency transparency, which seems to be a fairly hot topic at the moment. What surprises Stephen Broderick, the CEO from FirmDecisions, is here as well. And what surprises us is that there is so much discussion and surprise about it all. This is what we've been finding. The issues I want to discuss today, we've been finding for about the past 15 years since we started in '98. So there's no real surprises. All we're doing today is hopefully alerting you to some things that you should be aware of if you're a client, when you're negotiating your contracts with the agencies. We've been doing this for 15 years, about 5,000 audits. Our clients include the likes of Unilever, Coca-Cola, General Motors, L'Oreal, Nestlé, so some significant advertisers in that group, plus there's a lot of local and regional business. So I'll just get on with it, but I just needed to make sure that we all understood that this is, all I'm doing is being informative. I'm told it was meant to be a bit of a controversial section, but I don't believe it will be unless it turns into that. So some recent headlines that you may or may not have been seeing. In Australia, there's been some announcements about some issues that needed to be looked at. Previously, there was a comment. Head of the world's largest ad buyer says not everything his agency does should be fully disclosed to clients. Again, this gets back to the whole notion of transparency. And I should say that when I started in advertising, transparency was something you used to put on an overhead projector, so it all obviously means something quite a bit different now. So more headlines have erupted in the US over recent times. Those of you who don't quite get the line of this one, it's all about denial, the river in Egypt. And there was this bombshell where a former CEO of an agency has come out with some fairly startling revelations, which the agency has been refuting. The point being that there's a lot of now discussion about it. There was a survey published in Ad Age just yesterday where the question was, do you believe that the US media agencies are receiving rebates from media sellers and vendors that they don't disclose or pass on to clients? 84% of respondents have said yes. And then there are those who say, well, if they do it, well, I guess they're working hard for it. But again, is this ethical or unethical? And 74% say that they believe this to be unethical. So it's like it's all suddenly come about like it's a new story. But in fact, 10 years ago, there was breaking news about IPG having disclosed certain issues that they found within the group that they then set about remedying. But the point we're trying to make is that things aren't really that new. In the WFA, many of you are probably members of the WFA, and there was a survey done a little while ago, and the statement was agency fees are falling, yet media agency profits continue to rise. Agencies and media owners are being less transparent than ever. Yes or no? And 88% of respondents said yes. So whether we should be grateful to the procurement people of the clients for pressuring fees down, or whether we should be saying, well, actually, maybe they've gone a bit far. But the reality is, and we have a lovely graph that we have in our usual credentials presentation that shows that the agency fee profits are going down, the fees going down, the profits up. So we have to ask, how can this happen? So the agency's have been managing to create other services to sell, not managing to create, they've been building new services to benefit the clients, to benefit the client demands or expectations or objectives. In doing that, sometimes these services are provided outside the terms of your normal MSA, your normal global contract, local or regional contract. And these are the areas in which we find many times that these one-off agreements look very attractive to a client, and the clients sign off because they're good rates. For instance, there's the inventory or the trading desks where clients are encouraged to sign off because the rates look terrific. But the issue is that there is a reduction in transparency because generally there is a refusal to allow audit rights. And of course, the agencies can explain why that is, and I'm not really clued up enough in the whole detail of how these DSPs and whatever work. But in terms of the true value or the machinations, it's a matter of why not have some transparency about what the true cost is and add a margin to it. So sometimes we did an audit recently where there was a fee of about $2.5 million, I think, and yet there was an extra $1 million earned by this agency through all these extra side agreements that were signed off by the brand managers or anyone who was not the CMO. So these other fees were being built up, again, legitimately, because there was a contract in place, and it's the clients who need to get their act together in making sure these sign-offs are happening correctly. So the question really should be about your contract. And again, I'm talking to the clients here, but agencies obviously have a very vested interest. So the contracts need to protect your interest. And what I'm going to present to you now are a number of areas that you should consider when you're developing or ensuring that your contracts are up to date and current. Same thing. So first of all, there's AVBs or AVRs, annual volume rebates or annual volume bonuses. Value banks, you may have seen in one of those earlier headlines that they've become fairly topical. Basically, they are an incentive to the agency to spend money with certain vendors. The agency gets the money based on the volume that they process through those vendors. Your contracts, your client contracts should say that you get your share of them because it's your billings that are involved in generating that. These are happening at not only a local agency level, but a group level and a global level. So again, back to your contract, what does it say? We've done another audit recently where the fee was actually doubled by the AVBs that the agency was able to recover, but they were able to retain it because the contract didn't require anything else. So the agency was not doing the wrong thing, but the contract didn't really require them to give it all back. So then there's the timing of when does the money go back. Sometimes they're 18 months after the event. Sometimes they're miscalculated. So in us doing our audits, we obviously look at those things, but these things are areas that you need to consider in doing your contract, what timing, the calculation, the verification, and actually the definition. Not so much in Asia, but in some parts of Asia, there is a media credits / unbilled media issue that can arise. And that's when you as a client are billed based on what media was booked. In fact, the agency may then be billed a different figure in some situations because perhaps it appeared in a different time zone, perhaps it didn't appear at all, that was just loaded at the wrong rate, it was cancelled off the schedule but it didn't get taken off the schedule. Whatever reason, sometimes there can be differences that arise. And these are called unbilled media or media credits. Timing differences arise because, well, actually we're still waiting on the vendor invoice to come in. But there's also permanent differences that arise, which is where there is a rate difference. Both of those are held by the agency because they're waiting on that invoice to arrive. Now, perhaps that invoice never arrives. Perhaps that rate difference is already finally booked and written off, or written out of the media creditors ledger. So when is it returned to the client? Is it returned to the client? These are issues, again, that your contract needs to deal with. And what happens if the relationship ends? Some agencies negotiate a time frame by which they can return the credits after a certain period of time because they say, okay, well, if we haven't received the media invoices for a couple of years, well, we're never going to because the publishers actually audited their accounts, they closed off, they moved on. But what happens if you terminate that relationship with the agency? Where does that money go? Do you then get it back? Or does it just get taken up by the agency? So again, a simple clause in your contract, or perhaps not so simple, but simply by putting a clause in your contract, you can deal with these sorts of issues that arise so that when those discussions arise, you then know how best to deal with them. Early payment discounts, EPDs, in this market throughout Asia, again, there are quite a number of countries that offer EPDs, and they can be as high as 2 to 5%. They can be prepaid and you get a discount, or paid in 7 days, or paid in 30 days, whatever the different vendor negotiates. But we had an audit recently where we found the EPDs were actually higher than the fee that the agency was earning from the client. Now, the agency, to give them credit, was using their money to earn that, so that was their money, quite rightly. But the client needs to know about these things and needs to be able to take them up if that's of interest. It's a cash flow thing, it's a cost of capital thing, but clients need to know about it so that, again, you can take that option up. And if in by receiving that discount you've offset the total agency fee, well, surely that's something worth considering. There are a number of other practices. In Thailand, there's special agency commissions, which is offered by a few outdoor vendors. They offer 2 to 3%. That comes through every month, these discounts, these special commissions. Agencies sometimes put them aside and call them AVBs and we'll give them back to you in 18 months, but they should be there and then. Again, let's put it in the contract. The $1 million pencil, it's our little way of saying that there's sometimes some arrangements where things are perhaps valued at a bit higher than their true value. The media vendors know that the AVBs, the incentives go back to the client, or they should go back to the client based on discussions that they've had. Many media vendors want to encourage the agencies to give them as much of their money as they can, or of the client's money, because they want to build their own business. So sometimes there's these $1 million pencil type deals where the vendor might negotiate with the agency to say, look, can you do some research for us based on audience or based on TARP or whatever weights of different client data, and for a 10-slide research presentation, they might give them quite substantial funds as a badly negotiated contract. So that's the way the vendors encourage the agencies to put them on what I'll call later the PSL, the preferred supplier list, so that the AVBs go back to the client, the vendor knows about it, so let's find another way to make sure we get the money, because the agency is the one that does the media plan. Cash flow incentives. Incentives might be the wrong term, but what actually happens is that in some markets, the clients actually pay honourably within 30 or 40 or 45 days, or sometimes 60 or 90. But the agencies often stretch out the vendors beyond the 90 days to 100. And we did one in China recently where it was somewhere about 12 months old. What happens is sometimes that the agency then negotiates with the supplier saying, if you give us another 2% off, we'll give you the money now without having to wait another 6 months. Now, again, these deals can happen, and again, you as clients need to be sort of cognizant of that. The PSLs, preferred supplier lists, there are some agencies that have a prescribed list of vendors that they insist must be on every media plan. And if you don't do that, you need authorisation from your manager as to why you haven't included those vendors. And again, these PSLs arise because the agencies have arrangements with the vendors. And you as a client need to understand, we thought the media plan was in our best interest, not on a financial interest for the agencies. And this is where a conflict of interest can arise, isn't it? Where, in fact, who is the agency actually working for, or trying to maximise the benefits? When we get to digital, it's become very complex. We've heard over the past day and a half, or nearly 2 days now, there's been a lot of talk about digital. Confuses me, which is no great surprise because I'm an accountant. But the old system used to be client, media agency and publisher. Now we have a daisy chain of a number of entities all interspersed between the client and the agency and finally the publisher. There's the buying group that has sometimes a number of agencies within its group. There's the trading desk, the data platforms, the ad exchange networks, all involved, all with different margins along the way. And as we say, the more you add to the daisy chain, the less transparent it can become. And what generally happens is any deal you have with these DSPs is generally non-auditable. the agencies maintain that they will not allow it, and again, they have a good argument to support that. But with the trading desks, often the agencies will buy blocks of time. They can prepay it, get a better rate if they prepay it, buy a whole program. They develop their inventory. They might throw in some of the value banks, the bonuses that were in the value bank, put them in there because they're non-auditable. The client data is used to put it all through the sausage machine, and out comes a great media plan that is going to benefit the clients. That's the whole purpose, and that's the proven outcome. But who gets the AVBs of those? Because it's non-auditable, you don't get to know what the actual costs were, who the vendors were, or what the costs were and how it was all constructed. And usually to opt into these contracts, there is a non-audit clause, which means there's no transparency. So what we're suggesting is perhaps there's a way in which, okay, well, I understand the agency does actually develop this data, develop the media planning with some good intelligence, with some good software, and then on it goes from there. But why not just start with well, let's work out what the costs are and add a margin for all this extra. Why does it have to be non-transparent? Why does it have to be potentially up to 400% margins, I've been told, in some markets? Ad serving is another area where it looks really small on the media schedules, maybe $4,000 on a $1 million schedule, and clients typically just sort of tick that off. But in reality, many agencies have negotiated ad serving rates at a global level, so the rates are really low. But agencies like to introduce rate cards that may involve a fairly high margin as well, a multiplier. And then, of course, the ad serving rate on the schedule is based on the plan, but digitals roll out over a number of months. Do they actualise it at the end? Do they say, well, actually, we didn't get as many impressions as we wanted, let's look at the delivery reports. Oh, actually, no, we didn't. So the ad serving fee should be less. Occasionally, setup costs might be doubled up because it's billed in two areas, once on the rate card and once through the general invoicing off the schedule. And so we get to the question now, who is the agency client? Clients have negotiated, or clients' procurement people have negotiated really hard with the agencies, minimised FTEs. I don't want the senior people, I want the low people. We don't work that many hours, we're not having this many jobs, and then they make you stick to the number they had in their budget. That's the way it works often. There are those clients who actually work it out fairly. I think that's important, that it should be fairly worked out. But agency fees have been reducing and has forced agencies into new ways of generating extra income. So if the agency has looked to the vendors to generate this extra income for them, you have to ask what's happened to media neutrality. If there's these preferred supplier lists where the vendors are specially listed, already pre-listed, we've spoken to people who have said they've already got the media plan worked out before the client's even given them the brief, because they know who they've got to include in it. So we believe there's two steps that need to be taken to encourage transparency and accountability with the agency. One is obviously the contract, which is what I've tried to stress all the way through. It's about the contract, ensuring that you have it up to date and current and exhaustive, the belts and braces type. And the other thing, which is the 5-second ad, is that obviously you need to do compliance audits. Unless you've got someone going in to do audits, to check it, to make sure the financial aspects of your relationship are covered off, it's not worth having the contract if you're not going to go and check it. And that's the second part of the process that's required. So we've got some top tips. Remuneration and bonus calculations, the whole structure needs to be fair and clear. As I say, it's no good going in to talk to an agency saying, let's come up with an FTE, let's come up with a resource-based fee, but by the way, I've only got X dollars in my budget, so let's work within that and try and backfill it. It needs to be fair and clear, because by not doing that, you're encouraging agencies. Agencies have to make a profit. They're public companies, so they need to make a profit somehow. Best to have it all in the contract and understood and agreed. Bonus calculations need to be simple, clear, and independently calculated. At school, I never was allowed to mark my own exam paper, and I think in bonus calculations, I think agencies, sure, they have all the data, but it needs to be independently checked by some experts who know what they're doing. In the contract, this is very important. The AVBs, the rebates, the discounts, All these other areas we've discussed need to be clearly identified, and the treatment of them. If they're immediate credits, when are they given back? When are they recognised as permanent differences or timing differences? What happens at the end of the relationship? All those things we've discussed a little bit before. Audit rights, again, as I say, we believe that an audit is part of this whole process. I reeled off a whole long list of very big clients that we have around the world, and they use us because, or they do auditing because they know it's good corporate governance to check it. So you, the client, need to be able to determine who your auditor will be, not be told by the agency who to use. You need to be able to define what data those auditors can access, because sometimes the auditors get blocked because it doesn't actually define it in the contract. And what data is to be looked at, and what frequency, how often, once a year, once every couple of years, does it really matter? The rights must be extended to the group companies. So often we get a management representation letter signed by agencies saying we do honour our contract, we are complying with it, but as an agency they don't sign it off as a group. So the rebates may actually be happening up here at a global or at a group level, but not necessarily at agency level. So they're not telling porkies, they're telling the truth signing that letter, but in fact a lot of the things are happening at a group level. So make sure your contracts embrace the whole agency group. And pay attention to digital, the rights and access. It's changing, it's modifying, and that's why it's important to keep your contract as current as you can and keep reviewing it. So in summary, I know you all like to hear that word. In summary, transparency is a challenge. It's not a given, you need to work at it. It doesn't just, we don't all have an outcry about the lack of or reducing amount of transparency. It's important that you have to work at it. The issues we're discussing, whilst there may be some headlines about different groups or agencies, it's actually across the whole industry. This is an industry-wide issue. So don't be thinking there's any one bad agency or one headlined agency. It's actually, this is endemic throughout the industry. And getting back to the first point, you need to have constant vigilance. You can't just be relaxed and say, we've got a good contract, that should keep us in good stead. Regular review of the contract. If it's more than 2 years old, it's too old already. It needs to be reviewed and not just updated, the appendix of the remuneration, the whole definitions, evaluate how your relationship works with the agency. Media is a big investment by most clients. It sits very high, a big percentage in the P&L. It's good corporate governance to ensure you protect it and that money is being properly adhered to. And you might as well maximise the benefit out of that media budget. Don't have it all being wasted or going off in areas you don't understand. It's important to make sure you protect it and understand it. So that's all we have for you today. I hope that was helpful.
Very much indeed. Thank you very much, David. Round of applause, please. We have time for a question. So while you're thinking up, we have time for one question, so please raise your hand quickly while they're thinking of it. You obviously liked your company so much you came back. Tell us what the story was there.
Oh, it is a long story. I don't think we've got that much. We're already down to zero. No,
never mind.
It just grew into a global business. I was based in Australia. The head office needed to move to London at the time. Stephen was my partner in it in London, and he's taken over it and run it from there. But so I set off tiptoeing through the tulips, doing a few other things. Right. And then Stephen and I have kept in touch all the time, and there was an issue that needed to be dealt with in APAC, so I've just come back as a staffer.
Brilliant. What better signal of confidence in the business? Any questions? Yes, Valerie. Who do you look to in the industry for doing this well or better than most?
Doing what though?
Which agency is most ethical is your question?
Who manage their contracts with vigilance, like you're advising?
Yeah, I think the clients that I've named are the one, some that we certainly know of that there's one of those that does annual audits. Every AVB market, they have an audit every year. There are others that, there's another company that has a whole raft of agencies, so they nominate 15 agencies a year for us to to audit around the world in different markets. The bigger clients have now put in place these steps to ensure that even if it's just spot checking, the agencies know that we're coming. And I think, I mean, what we often say is that if you're a client that audits, well then you can be more assured of the fact that your contract is being complied with. Because once you do an audit, you get to see where the contract is or isn't working for you. So one thing sort of leads to another, if you like. But I can't be nominating clients. Or
I wish you did. That would be most interesting.
Simulator.
Did you miss it, by the way? Dave's tones are so dulcet, we barely heard it when he said, the agencies already know that we're coming. If you'd said it with a little bit more gusto, I think it might have stuck. One quick question, though, in view of the absence of other questions. What was the biggest fish you ever hauled? And feel free to mention names, too.
I'd say, well...
That many?
Well, we were talking today, there's a $15 million one recently. There was about $40 million in South America. It was,
right. Okay, that many.
I mean, we're talking about large clients that spend billions of dollars, and it depends how far back you go and what you look for. But
I think you might be invited back to present at Festival of Media Latin America in Miami in a few months.
My question is, do you get incentivized?
Yes, Stephen whips my ass if I don't. No, it's no, we don't. We only work for a fee, and in fact, ever since we started, we refused. When the business started, no one else did what we did. So we'd go and introduce it to clients, and they'd say, "Oh, I don't have any money in the budget. Do you think you could do it on a share of recoveries?" I said, "Well, no. There are so many reasons why that's the wrong thing to do, and I won't go on, but there are so many reasons why that wouldn't work. And ultimately, the agencies will lock the door on us because they think, well, that's all you're here for, is to get money back, and that's not the reality. Because what we're really trying to do is to use the history to improve the future." And it's about improving the contract, stopping those errors from happening, identifying them, putting processes in place. So, yeah, sure, there's recoveries that come as a consequence. Sometimes it's the client's fault that those recoveries are there because they haven't done what, they're a bit culpable part way as well. So, yeah, we would have loved to have done. We probably wouldn't be standing here now. I'd probably have a much better suit on anyway. But
you'd be wearing a suit. At least you've still got the shirt on your back. That's a good start. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking David Brocklehurst from FirmDecisions.